Good evening, everyone, and welcome to my session. My name is David Mitchell. I'm a former principal of two schools in the United Kingdom. And over the last 10 years, I've been working with schools across the world on using safe, simple technology to bring audience and purpose into the lives of the children. And what I want to do today is spend a little bit of time with you showcasing how this can happen and telling you the story about what happens when you get it right. Because getting this right can transform children's lives. And I know this because I'm going to tell you the story about what happened to the children I was in charge of in my school and how it impacted them, not only to make them more engaged, enthused, but also how they were better at English, how they achieved better standards. And so what we're going to do is spend about half an hour, 35 minutes exploring this. There'll be time at the end to ask questions, should you wish to, and there'll also be my contact details if you want to get in touch with me. So I hope you enjoy the session. I hope you find it useful, and I'm sure you will. We're going to start in a moment by sharing a video that appeared in the BBC News about the project we were doing at my school. This was a school in Bolton, just north of Manchester in the United Kingdom. And Manchester is about 200 miles north of London. And so it's a fair way out of the city centre of London, but not far from Manchester. And our project was so successful in getting children to get better grades at school that it made the national news. So I'm just going to play the first minute or so of this video so you can see for yourself what they were saying, and I will discuss that in a bit more detail. So if we just play that first minute of the video, that would be great.
Morning, a new week ahead of us on BBC One, starting now at 6 o'clock.
Good morning, welcome to the programme. It's Monday the 14th of February. Plus, we'll be at a school in Bolton which has stumbled across an ingenious way of making writing cool.
How to make writing cool. Forget pen and paper. Students at this school are blogging their way to a literate future.
Now, getting boys interested in writing has been recognised as a major challenge by parents and teachers alike. One school in Bolton, though, may have found a rather modern solution.
Heathfield Primary has turned its pupils into enthusiastic bloggers who think that putting pen to paper via the internet is cool. Graham Satchell is there for us this morning. Morning, Graham.
Okay, if we just pause the video there. What I'll say there is, I've paused it there on purpose because Graham Satchell, who's the reporter, we were quite alarmed actually as a school when he opened his sentence and said, if you remember, he just said this, how to make writing cool, forget pen and paper. And our hearts sank when he said that, because our project was all based around making pen and paper more important to the children through the use of the technology, not replacing pen and paper, which quite often people think technology is going to do. So what I want to do is rewind a little bit really and tell you what happened, how we got to that point, what did we do, and share some of the success stories. So in the next slide, I'm going to go through a few of the problems that we had as we found our path to making this a little bit better for our children. So next slide, please. Every 10 years in the United Kingdom, we have something called a census. And I suppose countries have their own versions of this, where we have to fill in lots of information. And we found out when we looked at our census information that was given to us, that the children at our school, because they lived in that particular part of Bolton, were going to live 8 years less on average than the children that lived on the other side of Bolton or down the road who went to a different school. And that was quite an alarm to all of us as teachers. And it told us that we needed to do things about that. We didn't want our children being disadvantaged. So we wanted to do something about that. And in the next slide, will highlight really on one aspect of this, which was around aspiration levels. Now, our children in Bolton, as I said before, we were 8 miles north of Manchester. When you look out of the windows in Bolton, you can see Manchester. You can see the skyscrapers. You can see all the buildings. You can see where it is. But I wondered whether many of our children had been to Manchester. We went on trips to Manchester, to museums and things. And it was on one particular trip that we went to a museum in Manchester. And we took the children on the train to Manchester. And at the end of the platform, when we were waiting at Bolton railway station, we saw this sign. It just said Manchester and beyond. And I remember looking at that as a teacher and thinking, wow, I wonder what is beyond Manchester for our children. We can't even put it on a railway station sign, but I wonder what it means. And I went back to school the week after, and I did a little survey in an assembly. When we had all the children together at the beginning of the week or at the end of the week, we call this an assembly, and we sit down, we talk about certain aspects of learning and things that might be in the news. And I said to the children, how many people have been to Manchester? I asked them to put their hands up. And about 1/3, about 30% of the children had been to Manchester. And I was really surprised by that. So I said, well, who's been to Bolton Town Centre? This is only a couple of miles away. Who's been to Bolton Town Centre? And about 30% of the children had not been to Bolton Town Centre. They stay in their local village, their area within the outskirts of Bolton. And I was really shocked by that. And that's what we decided to do. That was the moment we decided to showcase the world to our children so they knew what was outside of Manchester, outside of Bolton. And so for you as parents and organizations in Dubai or wherever you are watching this from, this is about what's outside of Dubai, what's outside of your area for your children. Do they know what opportunities there are outside of there? Do they know how people differ, how communities differ and things? And that's what we decided to do. So in the next set of slides, we're going to explore how we moved from changing the children from having an audience of one, their teacher, because that's all they have in every school up and down the country, in every school up and down the globe, around the globe, the children are always writing for one person, their teacher. And I want to share with you what happens when suddenly you allow your children to write for people around the world. And it's amazing what happens. So if we move on to the next set of slides, for anyone who's watching this who doesn't know what blogging is, I'll just share a minute with you to explain what that is, because we are using technology that I said before that's available on phones. It's free, so long as it's used safely, and I will talk around that in a second. But there are two aspects to blogging. The first one is, and if we go to the next slide, you'll see that a blogging platform is open to the public. So all the classes I work with all have their own class blog, which is open to the public. My class had one. All the classes I'm working with now around the world have one. And remember, it's open to the public. And some of you will be thinking, well, probably a lot of you will be thinking, how can that be safe? Now, I know you've just been looking at a session around internet safety, and this fits really nicely with that, because how we make this safe is that nobody can put anything onto the class blog unless it is approved by the teacher first. So the teacher is the gatekeeper of safety, the gatekeeper of quality, okay? They have two roles, to be the safety officer and the quality officer. So nothing can get on without the teacher approving it first. The second part of this, in the next slide, it shows you around commenting. Now, anybody in the world can also leave a comment for the children, anybody. But just like before, no comments can be seen publicly until the teacher approves it first. And again, that makes this ultra safe. And in fact, out of the thousands of schools that I've worked with, out of the thousands of classes I've worked with, we've never had a problem with anything inappropriate being sent because nobody can see it. The teachers can see everything first and approve these. And this is the platform we used. And I do have some links to share with you later on in terms of if you are interested in looking at something like this, where you can get these from, because they, on the whole, can be free anywhere in the world. Now, in the next slides, what I want to do is just showcase to you what happened when I launched this. And hopefully you can learn from some mistakes that I made. Because did I make some mistakes? I made plenty of mistakes at the beginning. Nothing too important, but what we can do is make sure you as parents, you as schools, as teachers, can learn from these and make sure you have a slightly smoother run than I did as we started. So if we just take it to the next few slides, we'll start with the next slide. In my head, this is what I thought was going to happen. I was a little bit excited to launch this with the children, but this is what I thought was going to happen. Okay, the platform was ready on Monday, the 21st of December, 2009. This was, and I built it up. I told the children, this is what we're going to do. This is the platform. I expected the children would be patient. They would wait for the audience to come and they would understand that. I thought that the parents would be really interested and they would be coming to the blog and showing and writing on their comments about what they're reading from their own children. And I thought the children would be driving their own traffic to their class blog as well, because you know now all your children, they're on, well, like my children, they're on TikTok, Snapchat, WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, all of that stuff that they are currently on now. This was 2009. Does anyone remember MSN? Okay, things like that, the children were all over. I don't know where MSN has gone now, but back then the children were all over it. And I thought my children would be communicating with each other on MSN and whatever networks they were on and driving their own traffic to the blog. But in the next slide, what you'll see is actually what happened. I built it up to be something massive. I was really excited, but actually nobody came. Okay. On Monday, the 21st of December, this was me at the front of the class. Okay, children, today we're going to launch your class blog. It's going to be amazing. People from all over the world are going to come and see your work. It's going to be fantastic. The children were quite excited, to be honest, for that moment. Oh, this sounds really good. We quite like the sound of this. But nobody was there. The children weren't patient. They live in a society, in a world now where it's instant. You ask how many of your children have sent emails, they'll look at you like you're a dinosaur. They don't wait for replies. They are snapping where they get instant replies. They are WhatsApping when they are waiting to see if the other friend has read it or not that moment. And if they've not read it in 5 seconds, they're quite annoyed. And so they weren't patient by this at all. What I realized as a teacher, they didn't really understand the notion of waiting for the audience to come. But one thing in particular, I was told by all this was I had to be much more proactive as a teacher to get the audience to come. And if you look up on the screen, you can see a globe. Now, every class blog I launch with children and their classes has one of these on. It is by far, I've been teaching 25 years. I know I don't look it. I probably do actually, because when I started teaching, I had hair. It was that long ago. But I put these globes on the blog, and these globes tell the children, tell the parents, tell the teachers, if there's someone on their blog right now, it tells them where they're from. And that globe spins around and it tells the children instantly if there's someone on their blog. And when I introduced this, I said, look, and there's the globe. And at that moment, Thomas at the back of my class jumped up and said, Bolton's on there. Bolton's on the blog, sir. And I said, oh, that's fantastic. I know, but that's this computer, Thomas. Oh, that was the worst thing I could have said. He was so annoyed. He thought someone else from Bolton was on the blog, but no, it was this computer, and I'd lost him for a moment. But for the whole of that Monday, no one came on. It just said Bolton. No one else came on the blog. So on Tuesday, we came back in again. I said to the children, today's the day, guys. We're going to have somebody come on the blog from somewhere else in the world. And for all of that Tuesday, nobody came on. Nobody came on at all. And no one came on because nobody knew about it. I hadn't told anyone. I just expected people to come, and no one would be coming on. But on Wednesday, I knew this was probably my last chance before I lost the children completely. And I said, come on, today's the day. And this is when I took to Twitter, and you'll have heard of Twitter probably. And I took to Twitter to send out some tweets saying, please come onto the blog and look at some of my children's work. They've worked so hard. And at 11, it was about 20 past 11 in the morning, I was doing maths with my children. I put the globe in the background on the screen behind me, just in case. And at 20 past 11, it happened. Our first visitor. It was 20 past 11. I was doing maths with the children. I remember a scrape of a chair as Thomas at the back of the class rose to his feet and shrieked at the top of his voice, New York! New York's on the blog. And we all looked at the globe, and New York was blipping on the globe to show the children somebody from New York was on the blog. We could not believe it. Somebody, our first visitor, was from New York. And we stopped the lesson. We zoomed in, we had a good look, we had a nosy, but something wasn't quite right. The flag didn't look right. The location on the globe didn't look like it was in America, in the right place. And there's another button you can press giving you the information about that latest visitor. So we pressed it. I said, shall we find out exactly where they are? And the children were like, yes, fantastic. So we pressed the button. And then the next slide, you will see exactly where they were from. They were not from New York in America. They were from a little tiny village called New York near Newcastle in the United Kingdom. I didn't even know there was a New York in England, but there was. And the children, I thought they'd be quite disappointed. They were actually quite excited that a little village called New York near Newcastle, about 100 miles away from where we were on their blog. And that showed me that moment on that Wednesday, the 23rd of December, that told me as a teacher, Twitter was going to be used by me to bring people to the blog. And that's when the magic started to happen. And in the next set of slides, what I want to do is share with you some real examples of the impact this had on the children. Now, when we go to the next slide, we'll zoom in a little bit here, and you can see that we've got a globe, we've got a world map there. And if we just go to the next slide, we can see in a bit more detail, we've got Guatemala, Germany, Australia, and I'm going to take you to these three places in a moment as we discover the impact this had on the children. Now, in the first slide, we're going to zoom off to Guatemala. Now, to be honest, I don't know anyone in Guatemala. In fact, I don't really know where Guatemala is. It's in that circle somewhere. I think it's just behind the first slide we're going to visit now. So if we get to the next slide, I'll explain what happened in this week, which was a week in October. And what happened here was we were doing some report writing in class, in my year 6 class. So these were 10 and 11-year-olds. And one of my 10-year-olds called Raja was doing some homework because on the Friday he was going to write a report about the howler monkey in the lesson. And I'd asked all the children to write down their facts. They needed to find 20 facts about their chosen animal and write them onto their blog from home, because the children could do this from home or in school. It's entirely up to them. So Raja went home and he wrote 13 facts, not 20. He didn't do it correctly. He did 13 because he cheated. And I'll explain how he cheated. He wrote 13 facts and then said, I can only find 13. Please, can you write a comment and leave me some more facts so I don't get into trouble with Mr. Mitchell? So I thought, well, that's quite ingenious, really. I was quite pleased that he'd used it in that way. So I went on to Twitter. I took Raja's blog post And I put it onto Twitter saying, please, can anyone help Raja with his homework? He needs the help of any howler monkey experts. I know it's a bit of a long shot, but I put that out in the evening. And overnight, what landed on my dashboard as the teacher were 11 more comments from all over the world. There were comments from Bolton, there were comments from London, but there was one particular comment from a place in Guatemala, from it was actually a teacher who works in Leicester, who'd said, my daughter has taken a year out of university, like a gap year, and is volunteering at a howler monkey sanctuary in Guatemala. Here's the charity email address. Do get in touch with her. I'm sure she'd love to help you. And I remember that coming to me. It came to me first. I was so excited. I went to school the next day, waiting for Raja to come in. And I said, Raja, have you seen your blog? And he said, no, why? I said, we've got 11 comments and we've got one from Guatemala. And he was really shocked. And we wrote an email to the charity in Guatemala that morning. And by the afternoon, we had a reply. And in the reply from Sarah, who was the volunteer, she put 15 pictures in the reply of howler monkey babies she looks after, all in nappies, and they all had to be baby bottle fed because they were all orphaned baby howler monkeys. And Raja couldn't believe it. And if in the next slide, what I've got for you is a picture of his work he did on Friday. Now, this work, he would normally do half a page in 40 minutes. But because he wasn't writing for me anymore, he was writing for Sarah in Guatemala, he wrote 2 full pages in 40 minutes. In fact, he didn't just write the 2 full pages in 40 minutes. I knew something was odd about Raja because he was shuffling around his pockets. And when we were starting, I said, what are you doing, Raja? He said, I'm finding my photographs. I said, what do you mean, your photographs? He said, well, I've cut out all my howler monkey pictures from the books I've got at home, ready for my report in school. And he brought all his pictures in that he cut out. He put them in a little envelope, put them in his pocket, and has stuck them into his work to make his report look like a genuine report that you'd find on the internet, that you'd find in a magazine. And this writing that he'd done here was actually 2 years ahead of any other writing he'd done previously for me. 2 years ahead of anything. Now, what that showed me was Raja could do it, but Raja wasn't doing it for me. Day in, day out, week in, week out, he was doing enough. And what we know, unfortunately, and it's a boy thing, quite often is a boy thing, that they will do enough to get by, enough to go under the radar, to not get into trouble so they can go out and play basketball or football or rugby or hockey or whatever it might be. Not all, but quite a few. And what that showed to me was he had listened to everything I'd been teaching him. He just wasn't bothered about doing it for me. But introducing a global audience, a real audience for him, made a real difference. And it made a 2-year difference. Raja, that year, went on to write over 500,000 words on his class blog outside of school. He followed the Indian Cricket League. He was mad about the Indian Cricket League. He was writing match reports on there. He was writing stories, horror stories, all kinds of biographies and things like that. He fell in love with it, not because of me, but because of this other audience. Excuse me. And in the next slide, what we'll see is the influence. Something happened in Australia here. And this was Raja's best friend called Binyamin. And if we zoom into the next slide, we'll see a photograph that changed Binyamin from a really lazy writer into somebody who was absolutely on fire. Binyamin had been writing a story, 5 chapters he'd written, each night over 5 nights. The story was called The Runner. And he'd only done, let's say, 100 words a night, and then he'd publish them. I see them first, I then approve these blog posts to go on. And when he'd finished the 5th chapter and he'd finished the story, he got a comment on the blog from a teacher in Adelaide in Australia. And this comment said, Binyamin, we are loving your writing all the way over here in Australia. My year 4 class are in love with your story. We are using you as our author of the week this week in school. And I thought you might like to see a picture of my children plotting excitement levels chapter by chapter of your writing. And he couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that children 10,000 miles away were that interested in his writing, treating him like an international famous author. And that moment made Binyamin realize he too had an audience outside of me, his teacher. And he also went on to write over 500,000 words outside of school, developing his love for writing, not because I was asking him to, just because he wanted to. And that was the big change, what we'd seen. Now, soon after that, we started working on lots of different projects. And I'll share one last one before we move on to some of the statistics and things like that, just to prove that this does work. And if we fast forward now to the next slide, I think we're off to Germany. And at this point, we were blogging about the World Cup. Now, we are all, as a teacher, and I know if there are any teachers watching this, we are always looking for things to teach. We're always looking for those little gems. And things like the Olympics, World Cups, work really well in our classrooms because it excites the children. And we were blogging all about the World Cup. And I had one child in my class who, because we decided we would adopt a new team. We weren't going to follow England because all the children were following England anyway. We were going to follow a new team, and we adopted Germany as our new team. Now, all of our children were quite excited about this, apart from one, Matthew. Matthew didn't like Germany. Okay, it wasn't his favorite country in the world. And he just had a thing, so did his family, about Germany. And he wouldn't engage with this project at all. And that was until England actually played Germany in the World Cup. And Matthew was saying, you wait and see. England are going to destroy Germany tonight. You wait and see. And the children, my class, were saying, don't worry, Matthew, it's just a game. And he was, just a game? It's not just a game. You know, and he went on like this. And if we, what happened was England played Germany and Germany beat England. They didn't just beat England, they thrashed England. And what was quite funny coming in the next day, if we zoom into the next slide, this is something I wrote on the blog. And I just put a quote of the week. I wrote, talk about enthusiasm. The first words a child said to me this morning, Matthew in year 5, was, hey, Mr. Mitchell, we won 4-0 to us. Did you see it? When he said we won, England didn't win. Germany won. But because he was so engrossed in the topic we were doing, he was saying we, as in Germany, won 4-0. No mention of the England game, just infectious enthusiasm. I put that on the blog. Within 3 hours, in the next slide, you will see we got a comment from the German ambassador to the UK, from Berlin. And I'm not going to read it to you, that he just spoke some lovely words to Matthew and some lovely words to my children. And if you can see down the left-hand side, all those, can you see all those flags? Those are all the flags of the countries that came to read the children's work that we were doing on Germany and the World Cup. Look at all those flags. This project only lasted 3 weeks, yet we had all these countries coming. It was phenomenal. Now, I did mention Twitter, and I want to spend 2 or 3 minutes showcasing a little bit about Twitter, because this is something as parents and as teachers and schools we can do. I spend so much time now with schools working on developing a school's use of Twitter. And it seems really strange that my life has become this, but schools really want to embrace this in a safe way. And as parents, we can do it too. And what I want to do, we're going to flick through a few examples. So what I want to do is, in the first example, we'll see now, is a way in which we can, as schools or as parents, engage with famous celebrities and organizations. Now, some of you will have heard of a famous singer, a grime artist called Stormzy. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's very big in the UK, quite big around the world. Now we had, this is a school I'm working with in Liverpool called Windsor Primary School in Liverpool, and I'd done the training with them on using Twitter effectively. And this school in year 6, there was a child called Hamda, and Hamda was just arrived from Somalia, had been in the school about a month, and she'd not done any homework because her English was developing all the time, and she was learning more and more English quite quickly. And as part of her homework, this was the first homework she did. They had to find a person, a celebrity they really looked up to, and write a little report about them. And Hamda went home and wrote a little report on Stormzy, her hero. And her teachers were so impressed with her, they sent it to Stormzy on Twitter. Now, Stormzy's got, 3, 4, 5 million followers on Twitter, but they sent it to him anyway with a little picture of it. And in the next slide, you will see that he didn't just respond. He then sent it out to his 5 million followers saying, "Yes, Hamda, you smashed it. Well done." And with a quote there showing the work that she'd done. And you can see the stats there, 123 retweets, 1,328 likes. That was within 5 minutes of him sending this information out. By the end of the night, we had 40,000 retweets. We had 100,000 likes on there. And in the next slide, what you'll see is the Evening Standard in London, the newspaper in London, wrote a story on it that same night saying Stormzy congratulates young schoolgirl on Twitter after she writes an adorable essay about him. Now, Hamda, remember, was new to the school. She was quite shy. Not after this, she wasn't. She was like queen of the school. She was walking around with a swagger to die for. She was suddenly really popular because she was Stormzy's best mate. And it was a wonderful thing, but only because those two teachers had spent 30 seconds sending something out on Twitter because they were so proud of her. Now, in the next slide, we'll look at some other examples. We'll flick through a few here. Some of these people you may well not be familiar with, but in the UK, they're quite prominent and quite, they've got a celebrity status. Rachel Riley, she's like a maths expert on television. So when the children are doing maths, Mr. Russell at Coles Heath Primary School in Birmingham, a school I'm working with, sends out some work and includes some famous people with maths. And here she is replying to Ella saying, "Well done, Ella, a huge high five." In the next slide, we've got some other things. We've got companies. This was a very young child, 4 years old, writing about buses because he loved buses. Now, Stagecoach, they're the company that make buses in the UK. And this 4-year-old was very happy to have a series of tweets from the people that make buses who are quite famous in the UK for making buses. And if we go to the next slide, we can see we've got even more examples. For example, here, a class in a school in Newcastle who were learning about Egypt. Well, who did we send the work to? We send it to the ambassador to Egypt, who's called Jeffrey Adams. We found him on Twitter. We send it out to him on Twitter. And he replies saying, "Great blogs. Perhaps one day in the future, we'll be welcoming some of you to Egypt as famous archaeologists." Now, to children who live, in Newcastle, that's aspiration in a tweet. Okay. It's really, really encouraging for the children. Now, as we move through, you'll see we've got famous authors there replying to children. That's the Children's Laureate author, a very famous position in the UK that only one author gets every 2 years to work with children and even the royal family and things like that, replying to children. And in the next slide, we'll see more examples of Cressida Cowell. And again, if we carry on, we'll see others. This is S.F. Said, very famous author who's won loads of prizes for his books, Varjak Paw and others engaging. And as we move through some more slides, we'll see what he said to the children, really encouraging some of the children in Green Class in Wigan in the northwest of England. And as we move through some other slides here, you can see what people are saying. David Baddiel, a famous comedian and author, we're sharing blog posts with him. Now, what I want you to look at here, or if we just look at the previous slide there, and just look at the timestamp. This was 11:35 in the morning. I sent this out to the class, with the class I was teaching at 11:35 in the morning to their author. I said to them, I sat them round, shall we send this to David Baddiel? And they were all like, yes, send it to him, send it to him. So we sent it to him. And look, it's 11:35 a.m. And look at this, his reply came in at 11:37 a.m. So within 2 minutes, I could say to the children, look what the author has said. And we could then relay that back to the children. So I'm going to flick through a few slides now because I'm aware of time. So if we just go to the forward that slide, if we go to the next one and the next one, and again, I think there's two more, and once more. I just want to look at some of the impact to finish on. So I want to make sure there's time for questions if there are any. And so what I want to do, there are a couple of slides here we'll look at, and I'll explain a little bit, but it gives us a picture of what's happening. So if we go to the first slide, what we'll see here is that before we started blogging, in the UK, we have something called SATs when the children are 11 years old, and it measures the children on a level, well, it used to, it doesn't anymore, it's slightly changed, but it gives the children level 3, which is below average, level 4, which is average, and level 5, which is above average. And before we started blogging, we had 9% of children that reached the most able, the above average, which was below where we should have been. After 1 year of blogging, we went from 9% who were getting that level 5 to 60% who were getting that level 5. That's what got the BBC News interested in us, because that was the biggest increase in the country across the entire country in terms of writing levels in the school there. And if we go to the next slide, it wasn't just the attainment. What this shows is that the children were making double the amount of progress each year in writing. Those children that were blogging in year 6 were making double the amount of progress because they were falling in love with it. 3 points progress was what was required. Our children were getting 6 points progress or more. So it was a huge impact. And just to finish, there's a couple more slides I'll share with you. So if we move on to the next one, this is really for parents here, because all the projects I run with schools, and if we look at the first slide that's coming up here, we track the children. All the children sit a survey. And when I worked with these 12 schools in Reading, which is just outside of London, there's about 3,000 children took this survey. 17% of the children, before we started the project, said that they wrote regularly outside of school. A year into the project, 56% of the same children now said that they wrote regularly outside of school. So parents, if your children are struggling to do homework, they're not motivated, you have to get them to really, get them motivated to do their homework. These children that are blogging, that are putting their homework on their blog, are wanting to do it, okay? If we go to the next slide, I think we're going to London now. This is a huge project in Tower Hamlets in the East End of London. I think there were 8,000 odd children doing this project. At the beginning of the project, 27% of children said that writing was their favorite subject. A year later, after halfway through the blogging project, 63% of the same children said that writing was their favourite subject. And in the final slide here, what I'll share with you is, and this is of keen interest to parents, because I've got children, I've got a 13-year-old daughter, an 8-year-old son. They are either on Snapchat, the older child's on Snapchat all the time, or my youngest son, he's on Fortnite and games like that all the time. But here it shows that 79% of the children used a connected device at home, 82% using it for gaming, 11% for writing at the beginning of the project. Halfway through the project, 84% using a device at home, but look what's happened. 69% using it for gaming, not 82, but 33% using it for writing, not 11%. So outside of school, this is starting to have a real impact for the children. Now, so I hope for parents and for teachers, you can see some impact there. If you want to find out more, there are over 10 case studies on my website, clusterblogging.net, that are written by the schools. I've got nothing to do with these. These are written by the schools that tell you what type of impact they've seen in their schools. And I'm also starting some projects where we've got quite a bit of interest from schools in and around Dubai who are wanting to do something. And it's the very first blog post that you'll see on that clusterblogging.net. If you're interested, let me know. And if you've got any questions outside of that, in the next slide is my email address. I'm happy to share or answer any questions you have regarding this as a parent or as a school that you may well have, either in a week's time, 2 weeks' time, or sooner than that. But I know we do have some time for some questions. We haven't got long. We've got a few minutes. So I'm just going to, I know there's been a little bit of something going on in the chat. So we have a question from Ulnar that said, can my child log into this blog and just post their work here? Now, it's a really good question, Ulnar. What you'll need is a platform, and I would say the two best ones to go for would be, as a parent, you will need to set this up for them. And that's either going to WordPress or use Google's Blogger tool. Those are the two that you can get. If it's something you want to do and you want to work with your school on, the school might want to do something slightly different, and they can approach me and they can ask for my advice there. But as a parent, if you're wanting to do it, if your child, I would say, is under 13, you might want to oversee it, and you sign up for the blog and you let them write on your device or a device that they can log into as you, and then you can see what they're doing. If they're over 13, then they can sign up for these themselves as a user. But that's where I would start. If you've got any further questions about that, do email me, Ulnar, and I can give you some guidance on that. Okay. Right, I think we've got no more questions at this point. Do make sure you take my email address down. Stay in touch with me. I'm always keen to help and support if I can. Any schools wanting to get in touch, please do. I hope you found that useful. I thoroughly enjoyed telling the story about my children and what they did. It's a privilege to do so. I hope to see you soon. And thank you very much, and stay in touch if you can. Thank you very much.